Hi, I'm Lisa,
And I'm Johnny.
and today we're going to talk about movies
Horror movies, to be exact.
because this is Gutted, and that's what we do.
That's right.
That is right.
Yes. Definitely going to have a lot of fun today, I think, talking about this one here.
I'm really excited.
First of all, and this is for the people watching the podcast, you may have noticed some things, new items on our desk.
I hope you would notice some new items on our desk. We like to keep adding some decor up here, set the mood and the ambiance.
Especially when it has to do it with the movie we're going to be talking about. Which is Dead Alive.
Dead Alive.
Dead Alive.
Or Braindead.
Or Braindead, a.k.a. Braindead. It's original title.
Yes.
And we didn't really look into why that is, but I'm assuming there was another movie around that time that has a similar name. Typically, you see that in movies, like foreign movies, especially when they come to the U.S. If, the basic title might match another movie title either around the same time or pre-existing movie. And then, the distributors will come to an agreement of changing the name to wider releases, whether it's home release or back then it was theater and home release too. But this movie was made in 1992.
Good old early 90s.
Early 90s, yeah. Great time in all of our lives, at least for us. I feel like it was, at least. There was a lot of great things that came out from that era, this movie being one of them. Probably, I don't know entirely how the popularity was in the U.S. at the time, but I know that this movie was extremely popular in New Zealand, its home country where it was produced.
Really?
Because it actually, I think it was Batman Returns came out at that time in New Zealand, and they had more attendance for this movie than that movie.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so it's definitely something.
Crazy.
The word spread probably when this movie was released, and I'm sure people were just flocking to the movie theaters and wanting to know what all the fuss was about, because it is probably the most goriest and craziest comedy horror, I should say.
Yeah, it's actually listed as comedy horror. Most
yeah.
fans of any horror movie, like if they find it funny, it's personal. Like,
right.
On our own, we find it funny. It's not that it's listed that way. But Dead Alive was like, its genre is legit comedy / horror.
And that's depending if you like that sort of comedy. It's very violent, but in such a campy way, though. I mean, it's over the top, but also very realistic, which it makes me confused. But that's why I think I love it so much. It's like my emotions are confused. I get all tied up watching because I'm like, that is so gross. And then they have like a funny one-liner right after something really gory happens.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is nuts, So you're put in this weird state depending on how how you can handle like gore and grossness, if you will.
Yeah, you can't eat while you're watching it. Yeah. Like,
Unless you have a strong stomach, maybe, but
yeah, like iron-clad stomach. Dead Alive for me is the early years of my journey into horror, which is, it's Dead Alive really is the kind of horror that most people think about. Like, it's really gory and it's like over the top, and there's zombies and stuff. And so like most people are like horror, they're thinking something like Dead Alive. And we've already talked in like previous episodes how, that's just not true in the world of horror. But this is very nostalgic for me. Like, I remember going to like Hollywood Video and Blockbuster and seeing this cover on the shelves and not knowing anything about it. It's not like I could just like Google it or to learn about it. Like, I had to take the challenge and rent it and then just dive
into it. And I have a very similar experience. There's something iconic about this movie poster for me, because when I went to the old Hollywood Video in my town where I'm from, when I grew up, it always stuck out to me. It was there for years at Hollywood Video, and it was really cool. I might have talked about this in a previous episode, but the Hollywood Video that I went to was really unique. It had genre rooms. So
genre rooms?
A horror movie room, a classic movie room. And it was so cool. And I would go in there as a kid and, browse with my parents, and they'd pick up a movie. I'd get a Disney movie or something. But I would always see this movie poster. And if you're watching the podcast here, you'll see it on the desk here. But it's essentially the woman opening up her mouth with a zombie or creature of some sort in her mouth, which is also a very interesting poster because I don't think the person on the movie poster is even in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, maybe one of like the extras that dies in the massacre at the end.
Exactly. Maybe they did a promotional shot or something. And it does have some meaning, though. There is a similar situation that you'll see in the movie with this.
Super classic.
But yeah, so it's cool. We have very similar background to this movie.
It's called a splatstick.
Okay, yeah.
Which I've never heard before until the days of, like Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about doing this movie for this episode, going back through and like researching it a little bit, it's listed as splatstick. So in comedy, you have slapstick, but in horror, I guess you have something called splatstick, which I don't know who came up with that term, but it's perfect.
It is perfect. I don't know where to start with like how we can talk about the plot, because I don't know if it even really is plot heavy so much as it is just setting up the key moments to make crazy things happen.
I think we have to start with the obvious nod to a classic that it does, which is Psycho. There's a huge nod to Norman Bates and his relationship with his mother, which I thought was fun because it takes place in the late 50s, and he even looks like Norman Bates a little bit.
He kind of does. He has that sort of the hair is similar, the stature, the face,
the build, everything,
sharp features, and just kind of like oblivious to other things around him other than focusing on his mother.
Right. And they live in a big house on a hill, and like every shot in front of the house looks up at it, which is very similar to Psycho.
Right. Yeah, that is true. It's very like a mansion-style home that makes for a perfect setting for something I think we'll talk about later, which is the big scene. There's a big scene in this movie. It really, I was going to say rewards you with some great entertainment, but it is entertaining throughout, but the ending especially. But we'll get there in a little bit.
I think on a deeper level, I don't know if I'm just like looking too far into it, or if it was something that it was just the writers just decided that it was like a fun place to begin, or like it would be its core, but it's going back to the Psycho theme and Norman Bates' relationship with his mother and stuff. It's like the whole thing is about this guy finding his independence and breaking away from his mommy issues.
Right.
And that's it. That's purely what this, and then some gore.
Yeah, and then some gore.
It's kind of like, they said another movie so similar. It's like Shaun of the Dead. It's like a romantic comedy, but with zombies. So this is like this guy breaking away from dealing with his mommy issues, but with zombies.
Right.
Kind of.
And it does have those genre layers. That's for sure. I'll agree with you there. I don't think it's looking into it too much. It perfectly blends all of that kind of together. And I don't know. I do you have a favorite character in this movie?
Yes and no. I don't even know if they're characters, but I have two, and they're both zombies. I can't help it.
They're just so entertaining in this movie.
First one, number one, is the priest.
The priest, I was going to say that's my favorite too, so we agree on that.
His line, that's my favorite, is, "I kick ass for the Lord."
Yes. Okay, so I want to backtrack, though, just to like set up for what you're talking about, to add some context, but essentially this is an outbreak movie, a zombie outbreak. It starts from a source and it goes out, and you see how it unfolds, and they really showcase the effects of how it happens to you. Again, we've talked about zombie movies before where it's like, someone they get infected, and then how does that play out? You have so much creative leeway for that, and for this it's pretty sudden, but they do it in a way that you're like literally dying from the inside out, right? Or I guess,
that makes a lot of sense considering how disgusting it is.
Yeah, all the graphic, gruesome things that you would think that could happen with a crazy, nasty infection that would cause you to turn into a zombie. They do the special effects so well in this. So with all the outbreaks going on and our characters kind of being interwoven into this story, Lionel being the main one, of course, and then Paquita, his love interest, who is somehow tied all to this because of the shop she works at for her parents. Her parents seem to be very spiritual, supernatural kind of people. Her mother especially.
There's definitely a gypsy element.
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not I got that right, but that's exactly what it feels like because they break out the tarot cards.
The tarot cards were busted out.
And all of that. And while we're on the topic, this movie is terrible with stereotypes.
Oh, it's awful.
It's definitely a movie of the times.
Right. And really plays into it as well.
Oh, they lean into it pretty hard.
Yeah. And whether that was intentional to maybe make it more like of a parody of how ridiculous those stereotypes are, or if it was something not even thought of and just like, hey, we're just going to make this movie and just have all these stereotypes and not consciously thinking
I feel
of it.
I feel like your first assessment is right. I think that they did it intentionally because they're all like caricatures of, those stereotypes. And this whole movie is like a giant caricature of horror movies in general. Especially a lot of them that came out in the 80s, which to me, and I feel maybe I'm jumping around a little bit, but I feel like there's also nods to the Return of the Living Dead series just based off of some of the gore. Maybe it was the same. I mean, I don't know if there's some similarities between who was working on the special effects and the gore.
It's almost, I'd be surprised if there wasn't, because there is a lot of similarities with the special effects. And you were mentioning the zombie from Return of the Living Dead, which we covered in a previous episode, kind of looks like one of the zombies towards the end that basically has their face pulled off. And then you just see the flesh and muscles of the face and the eyeballs. But yeah, there is quite an extensive crew that worked on the special effects too. So when looking at that, I would definitely be curious to look back and see if there's any connections in that era of those types of movies, if people have worked on different projects. But
I would imagine so.
Yeah, and then if you like the movie, one of my top horror films, The Thing, you'll definitely like this movie, or at least appreciate the special effects, because there's also some similarities there too. That I found with the special effects, just morphing of body parts, limbs being cut off, mutations.
Right.
This movie has it all. It has it all in that respect. But kind of dialing it back to the plot though, as it rolls along, the Paquita, her character, gets involved with this, these readings from her mother that says there's something that she's going to have a true love. And it turns out being Lionel, and he's kind of like, what, kind of dumbfounded by her advances, and they want to go to the zoo, which I don't know if you can guess by now, but at the zoo, things go awry.
Yeah, and, it does, because there's an animal there that shouldn't be there, and the whole opening of the film is some greedy, what is he, a zoologist?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing, a greedy zoologist? Anyway, he exists. He goes into this like forbidden valley that's like sacred to the indigenous peoples there, and he goes and extracts some creature he's not supposed to even be touching or messing with, and wants to bring it to another country, and he doesn't quite make it home.
He doesn't, no.
But the creature he picks up does, and makes it, and ends up at the zoo. Which, by the way, there's so many things that are wrong with this scenario to begin with. First of all, this creature is like this rat monkey looking thing, which the claymation on it is also nostalgic.
It's nostalgic.
An older time.
I love it. And just real quick on that too, I'm just a little slightly disappointed it's great in its own way. It's cheesy, but that's the only time you really see claymation to a certain extent in this movie. So
why even have it?
Why even have it? Yeah. So I'm like, they did so good on all these other effects and making things look so gross and grimy and realistic. Why throw in this little rat creature? Although it does turn into an actual, plastic looking toy when the mother steps on it. I don't think that was claymation, but
no, it was definitely
the
like a
animation
prop.
of it was just so ridiculous, but also cheesy, and that's I think why we love it though. We're not just saying it's bad and terrible. We actually enjoy it. Nostalgic factor too. And
so thinking about the creature in terms of like the story, like he eats another monkey.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just eat the monkey. It's not like the monkey was dead and he ate it.
Right.
He ripped its leg off.
Yeah.
And then ate it. And then the zookeeper is just like, hey, get away from this cage here. You're naughty. And like, oh, poor little monkey. I'm like, I'm sorry. If I was there in that scenario and one animal reached out to another one and just like pulled its leg off through the fence and gnawed on it, and it looks like something that crawled out of the bowels of hell. I don't know that should be available to the public.
No. There are a lot of questionable plot holes in this movie. That's one main one. And you kind of, but again, you
forgive it.
You forgive it. I mean, they're setting up these ridiculous comical scenarios that you're not supposed to question. You're just supposed to go forward and enjoy it. And I think even for that time, I don't think it was meant to be something that you were supposed to really analyze for, those plot details.
I mean, given the things that happen later in the film.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
and it's a zombie movie. So there are like numbers of places in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you haven't seen it, but you've heard about it and you want to go watch it,
Mm-hmm.
like I guarantee that you're going to sit there watching it and 4 or 5 times the words, "What the hell am I watching?" are going to just escape your mouth.
Right.
And it happened to me even the second, not the second, but the umpteenth time that I've watched it as a grown adult. I legit sat there going, why? What am I watching? And then I have to give up in the sense of don't overanalyze.
And
because
you can't stop watching though either.
No.
Yeah, you can't. You're they make it so interesting with every scene that passes. No scenes extend too long. The cutting is somewhat jarring in some occasions.
There's lots of close-ups?
I was going to say lots of close-ups on the face. You get reactions.
And they're all very intense.
And they're all very intense.
For the
too.
smallest thing.
And it might have to do with the budget thing, although I was surprised to find out that this movie was under budget when it was done. And
yeah, that's awesome, especially given all the effects and stuff that they have to do.
Right. And actually, I think we missed, a really important detail. This is a Peter Jackson film.
Oh, yeah. I can't even, let that go. It's very important.
Peter Jackson.
Like Lord of the Rings.
Lord
Peter
of the Rings,
Jackson.
The Hobbit, a King Kong remake.
He not only directed this film, he was one of the writers.
One of the writers, too. Exactly.
What is he doing all over this film? But at the same time, though, this film is such a cult classic that I guess now when you look back at it and go, of course, Peter Jackson, it was a Peter Jackson film. It stood the test of time when nobody thought it would even do well the day it came out.
Right.
It's stood the test of time, and horror fans across generations know this film and put it on their list as their top 10, top 5 or whatever, classic iconic stories.
And I don't know if there's any merit to this thought process, in my opinion, on it, but I feel like for Peter Jackson, I feel like this is a movie that's still widely unknown, though, in his catalog, him as being his first movie.
Which is surprising.
Which is surprising. But I feel like he kind of likes that fact, and maybe because he's slightly, every director seems to have that one early movie that they maybe kind of sweep under the rug, okay, yeah, that was a interesting time that I did movies. Now I'm doing these bigger ones now. Although I do know that he was working on restoring a recent version of it in the past few years. So maybe, that's kind of following the idea that nostalgia, maybe he's embracing the fact that, hey, no, people love this movie. I'm going to restore it. I wanted to get a wider release. I do know to this day, though, in New Zealand, it has not been released on DVD ever.
What?
So that's kind of strange.
That is bizarre. But it's also not widely available.
No. Well, my case, too, when I wanted to watch it. It's not on any major streaming platform at the moment, at the time of recording this, September of 2019, and was surprised by that. But luckily you have a Blu-ray copy, so I was able to watch that. And so you either have to special order or wait for it to come back on Netflix, which it was at one point. Mm-hmm. But very interesting stuff regarding this movie.
It even shows up in other films, international films. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite films, which I hope we'll get to in a future episode somewhere, is Dead Snow.
Dead Snow, yes.
And one of the characters in that film is wearing a Braindead t-shirt.
Ah, yes, paying homage to.
Yeah, and they in that film, because he's wearing a Braindead t-shirt, that means in their universe they have zombie movies. And most zombie movies in those universes, they, up until probably recently within the last 5 years or so, they never acknowledged that zombies were part of their pop culture.
Yeah.
So it's always this new concept, and it's mind-boggling, how do I wrap my head around this fact that the dead have come back alive?
Right.
Whereas in Dead Snow, he's wearing a Braindead t-shirt. They've got a whole array. They're in this universe where all this stuff exists, which is interesting because in Dead Alive, when Lionel is trying to dig his mother up from the grave, and he gets attacked by those greasers.
Yeah.
When the greaser gets pulled down by Lionel's mom into the grave, right? Because he's pissing on her grave, and she like reaches out and grabs him, pulls him down. When he comes face to face with her, he says it. He says zombie.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I didn't really take note of that. You're right.
Yeah, it popped out at me because of Dead Snow, and because I've always thought about how films, especially zombie movies, they never. How is it in the universe of that zombie movie? Nobody has ever thought up the concept of a zombie. I think that's just a little too convenient and easy of a universe to have for your story. But yeah, he said it when
zombie.
He was getting which by the way is one of. There's so many good scenes, and that's a really good one.
That's a really good one too, and that ties into the priest. Well, you know, the mother does get infected. One of the first, or you know, not the first, but one of the earlier people that get infected. And of course, Lionel, being ever faithful to his mother, through the phases of her turning into a zombie, still sticks with her, tries to keep it under wraps. That she's a zombie, keeps her in a room or in a basement locked away with some other folks in there, other zombie folks. So you know, they go through the proceedings of her, the funeral, and you know, you get introduced to this amazing character, the priest, as you were mentioning earlier. And
what a badass.
Yeah, and he just, that line, "I kick ass for the Lord." He somehow conveniently shows up after the greasers attack Lionel and he doesn't seem to question why they're like so why are they so nasty looking as zombies either, or like how they just got like violently attacked by a zombie. He's just like, I'm gonna be here and I'm just gonna fight.
Yeah, and I think there was like some line he said where like, you know, evil is here or something like that, and it's like, I guess from a religious standpoint, you know, it's like the devil and his demons have come and I'm gonna shine. This is my time to shine. And but yeah, he just whoops ass so hard. And you know, the first time that I watched it, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. He's
gonna throw down. He's gonna be our savior.
Yep.
And fucking own this movie. And that didn't happen at all.
No. Not at all. He's kicking ass for like maybe a good minute or two in a sequence, and then boom, he's done.
He's done, and like kind of easily, which was very disappointing.
That was disappointing.
But I will say that Lionel, being sort of under the spell of his mom and all of his mommy issues, he comes off right away as like a weak character.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, he babysits something like 4 zombies in his basement by himself.
And
that's pretty ballsy.
And he takes the proper precautions when he interacts with them, although I don't know how people don't get infected when all the goo gets on their face from the zombies.
Well, you know, that brings up an interesting point. Yeah. So when you were talking about how the infection spreads and going through that process, it is really gross in this film how they portray it. But it's almost like the insides are melting, or the infection is so bad it's like eating them from the inside out. So you can imagine, you know, what that means. But there is, so when Lionel's mom first gets bit and she's going through all of her through that transitional period, you know, she's really sick, but she insists on having this lunch with keeping her lunch date with her guests that are coming over.
Yes, that is excellent. That sequence to me, I think, is one of my favorites because it has such classic comedy in it.
Yeah. It's ridiculous because
Slapstick
she's obviously
stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She's obviously really sick, and yet her guests are just sitting there like, what's wrong with her? Like, you're an asshole. She's obviously unwell. Like, take her to the hospital. Anyway, so she's sitting there, and I've never seen another scene like it or anybody try to do anything close. But they've gotten to dessert and they're eating their custard.
Oh gosh, this, you know, it's crazy to say the scene you're about to talk about. This one grossed me out the most, even though it's not the most graphic by any means.
No, and it's because it has to do with eating.
Yeah, I think exactly.
Like as a human being, like a regular meal, actually eating. So they're eating custard, and this guy, the 2 people who show up are like a married couple. And he's just this fat imbecile, kind of.
Yeah.
and he just wants, obviously the things are not right, but he just wants to finish his food and eat his custard.
Right.
And he's just like shoveling
and he
it.
loves it too. He's
Oh
just
my
like,
God.
this is the best custard I've ever had.
And he's like not even looking at his food, like a moron.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Lionel's mom, she got bit on her arm, and she has a bandage on it.
There's a bandage. Yeah, exactly.
And there's a scene where like Lionel's trying to clean it, and it's like pulsing.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's in my mind right now. And
the look on his face
Yeah.
is like, oh, I don't think this is good. Maybe you should go to the hospital. You're like, yeah. You fucking think? It has its own like heartbeat. But anyway, so they're doing this dinner, and she's got her, bandage around it, and it's doing its pulsing thing, and it just like shoots out a jet of like pus
and
and blood
from whatever concoction they came up with in the practical effects department. Looked it just exactly like how when you pop a pimple, but in a large amount, and it just. And the fact that they make it squirt out and it goes right into his bowl.
Straight into his bowl.
There's some like blood like mixture.
It's
in
red.
It. Yeah, it's
Custard
red.
is yellow. And he's like, dude must have his eyes closed the entire time. Like he's just.
The obliviousness of it adds to the comedy. Like everyone being oblivious to her.
Except his wife.
Yeah, that's
his
right.
His wife sees it. I'm pretty sure she secretly wanted him to die.
I think so.
Because she didn't say a fucking thing and watched her husband spoon full custard with some goo and ate it.
Yeah. And the fact that and his mom's literally falling apart. Like her ear comes off and she eats it.
Again, this woman
in her
who
soup,
is
or her custard rather.
Yeah, this woman who came to lunch is a horrible human being.
I think
horrible.
The one line before they even start to eat too, that made me just burst out laughing when she's like, "Get me my dress." Oh. Like her cheek skin is falling off.
Oh, no.
Like, "Give me my dress."
It's when she's my favorite is when she's putting on her makeup, and then she just does it all hard, and then like her skin just comes off, and she's like, oh.
And Lionel, bless his heart, he gets some glue to glue her skin back on her face.
He is ready to solve problems. That guy is something else.
He is.
But I bring up that scene because that guy ate the goop, but you never see him as a zombie because he was never one of the originals that Lionel put in the basement to try to contain the infection.
Right.
Or the virus or the spread or whatever.
That's true. That's true. You don't see him.
Nope.
After that.
I was waiting for that and waiting to see if I would see him because I was thinking the same thing at the end, Lionel and everybody else who's, trying to survive, all of this gore splashing around all over the place. It's going to get in your eye. It's going to get in your mouth.
Right.
Like there's no way to avoid it. And yet, why are they not zombies? But if we go back to that scene with the custard, then that's not how it happens. It has to be the bite.
Maybe he was safe. Maybe he was safe from it somehow. He ingested the goo, but it didn't actually.
But he wasn't bit.
Yeah.
So
you could really kind of, if you really wanted to, you could delve deep into how this thing spreads. Definitely probably not by like skin contact with the goo or ingesting something coming from the zombies. But anywho, I think we're kind of getting closer to leading up to the big grand finale because there are moments that we just discussed happen leading up to the big scene at the end. And how perfect is it to spread a zombie virus by having a house full of people at a party in the mansion?
That's right.
And that's what happens.
And that's what happens. And it's, without Lionel's control. It's out of his control. And it's because his uncle is a bastard.
A sleazy uncle who
is trying to get that inheritance.
Shows up, when the mother's dead, or they think she's dead. Not really though, and undead, I guess. But yeah, so he ends up throwing this big party, inviting all these people to his house. Not letting Lionel know a lot about it. And you have this big 1950s house party going on.
Oh, and they're throwing down.
They're throwing down. They're getting
smoking,
people are
dancing,
passing out. Yeah. And then, at this point, you know what's coming. And I think that adds to the entertainment value of this. Like, in some ways you could see what's coming, and sometimes in this movie there's twists and turns where you're like, oh gosh, I was not expecting that gross practical effect
and
right there.
Very creative.
Yes.
Some of these deaths are very creative.
Yeah, like who thinks of these? Was it Peter Jackson? Was it the prop department? Was it a culminating or like, a
collaboration? Yeah. Of, you have to imagine like being on a set and you're filming and you're, you've been at it for days, hours, weeks, whatever. And, a scene like the big house party scene, man, that could easily take a week of filming all by itself because of all of the blocking, all of the intricate special effects and the coordination, plus just getting lighting and everything else and then the props to work correctly. So you have to imagine that they feel... it must feel like you're doing the same thing over and over. Someone gets bit, someone loses a limb.
Yeah.
And so
that's cut and dry. That's like, we all know how that happens, But then they're like, you know what? Let's go the extra mile. Let's go miles.
Miles, yeah. And you have to wonder if the creativity was because they did it to keep themselves from getting bored of just the constant everything's covered in blood and everything is the same. There's a little bit of gore here, a little bit of gore there. Like, is this their way of having fun, being locked into these really long scenes of filming and coming up with different ways to utilize all of what they know, their technology and their props and
having such a talented crew? They're like, why not just take advantage of all these opportunities and crazy things we can do on set for this movie
and just go for it.
So I'm wondering, because out of those 11 weeks, which is of filming, which is what it took for this movie.
11 weeks.
11 weeks.
Wow.
I wonder how much time was allotted to that final scene. I imagine probably a lot of that.
I would say most of it because
probably.
Everything else is, it felt very short. I felt like everything leading up to that scene in the movie, because the movie's only an hour and 37 minutes, and I feel like most of the film is building up, of course, to that moment. But that peak in the film, I felt like, is the longest scene.
It is. And when you're watching it, you don't think that way, but then you think, wow, that was like possibly the last like 20 to 30 minutes of the movie, which this movie clocks in, I think, just under 2 hours, hour 30, hour 40 something. So that's a substantial amount of time in that scene
to give to just one particular scene in a film.
Yeah. Well, I think we should also describe what that scene all entails. I think we don't have enough time to talk about each and every detail of what happens during the whole thing. But as you can imagine, and what we talked about, there is an outbreak. It starts happening. The zombies bust out from the basement that Lionel's been keeping down there.
Because he accidentally gives them animal stimulant. Because the way he's been able to control them this entire time is with tranquilizer from a veterinary's office, which happens to be some former Nazi officer hiding out in...
That was
talking
so about
bad.
Stereotypes. I mean, that was just like, wow.
I mean, they didn't even try hiding it. I think there's like one shot
So
for like
blatant.
half a frame. You see him wearing like a swastika on his arm.
Yeah, he's wearing
and
a lab coat, and his like lab coat's ripped on his shoulder pad or his his arm, and you just see the swastika right there. It's like, I mean, was that even necessary? I think we got it.
I
think we got it. The first thing he says,
it.
"Are you from immigration?" when Lionel visits
and his
him.
accent is
like,
really thick. Not only that, but he's got that trademark bald head, the glasses, and then is he embalming an animal or something? But he's like digging around and he's like drooling because he's enjoying himself so honestly.
Yeah, that was gross.
Okay,
yeah.
I think you don't need to hold our hands on this one.
No, but I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's so blatantly stereotyped.
It's just in your face, yeah.
It's in your face. But so for the house scene, there was a lot of blood. I mean, when I say a lot of blood, I think that's still even an understatement. There's tons of blood. There's a shit ton of blood.
I believe it. They must have had like a... Geez, they must have had like a tank or something.
Well, yeah. I mean, one fact that is stated online is that the movie blood, not the amount, but this gives you possibly a frame of reference of how much there was and how much they were able to pump out. But during the lawnmower scene, which we'll get to in just a second, the movie blood was pumped at 5 gallons per second. So that is a lot. Like, you need a lot to do 5 gallons per second. And the seconds that last in those scenes are definitely more than 30 seconds.
That's insane.
So you can imagine, I don't know how they did that, like we were saying, the 11-week period of shooting, that was probably a lot of it's dedicated to this for the behind the scenes.
Jeez.
Yeah. So before we get to the lawnmower scene, because I think that's the one we should at least highlight and maybe get a little bit into what happens at the grand finale, because I think that was also just as shocking than a lot of what the movie is. So basically, it's interesting. I played a game I believe it's called Dead Rising. I always make video game references, but it's always neat to find the references from something we've watched in these games. It was on Xbox, I want to say 360 maybe, or maybe the first Xbox. But you're in a mall and there's a zombie outbreak, and you can grab various props and things and fight the zombies off in the hordes. One of them being a lawnmower, and in the game, that was such a delight to see the paying homage to the movie, where you can just run through the zombies with the lawnmower. And that's exactly what Lionel does in the movie. That's what they're referring to in that game. And what's the line he said? "Party's over."
Yeah.
So he opens the front door. There's a lot of cheesy lines. He says, "Party's over." There is a little bit of foreshadowing in the beginning of the movie of this too, as he's mowing the front lawn. I don't know if you noticed that the camera angle. Yeah, angle rather. And yeah, he just plows through the group of zombies. At this point, almost I would say 100% of the guests there are zombies. Yeah. I don't think there's a single one, with the exception of one that Paquita gets becomes her survival partner for a while, and then she has an unfortunate end, as many people do in this movie.
And quite the end.
Yeah. And he's just grinding through them. They're falling apart. Their limbs are flying, blood splattering everywhere.
He turns them into mush.
And it's amazing that he pulls it off. But
well, the thing is like, he kind of looks like Ash from Evil Dead.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that there was a direct reference in there somewhere to that. And the lawnmower is such a great idea. I mean, how it doesn't get clogged.
Oh.
I mean, I mow the lawn and hit a stick and it just jams up. Yeah. But I mean, maybe, mid-century technology is just more sturdy at that time.
Yeah.
But you know what? I was thinking about, where the hell did they get the idea for that? And there was a scene where Paquita is doing her own mowing of her, on a smaller scale, and she sticks a zombie head in a blender. And I'm like, dude, that's like the same thing.
Yep.
Maybe somebody was like blending up a juice and was like, dude, you could totally go through, if you had like a giant version of this, you could totally get rid of a bunch of zombies.
Yeah. I totally think, and it's funny that her character gets in on the action. Like, she's just all about like destroying these zombies as much as Lionel is. She's not afraid to just jump right in there, blend them up.
Yeah,
like
she's tough, man.
Yeah, she's tough. Yeah, exactly. And so ultimately, he does the deed. One of the old the greasers from the basement? I think he's
my favorite zombie number 2.
Number 2, yeah, and he gets it with the lawnmower as well, right?
He does, yeah. And it's very comical, because somewhere through all of this, like, he loses his intestines, which has a life of its own.
They start the legs walking up.
So he he's trying to break through a wood door, and he gets caught on some splinters, and it somehow cuts him in half, and then his guts fall out, and then his guts, become its own character.
Right.
And anyway, so he's still like going around killing people even as half a body.
Yeah.
And he comes out of nowhere. Yeah, he's totally relentless. Yeah. And he attacks Lionel when Lionel is least expecting it, and he finally gets him on the lawnmower. Lawnmower is flipped upside down like this, and it's really funny because he's just spinning around as the lawnmower is going, and Lionel just clicks in his head. He reaches out and grabs his arm to keep him from spinning with it, and he just grinds him all the way down, man. Just like he's juicing.
Yeah, he's wanted to really get him to nothing but liquid.
What's funny is, like, this film is another one of those films where you can't just shoot him in the head.
No, you're right. Yeah, they think, just as we mentioned, they're relentless. Like, they'll just keep coming at you. You gotta do what he's doing. You gotta grind him down. You gotta basically turn him to nothing.
Which is funny because few episodes back, you and I talked about Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And they explored that concept, which we really enjoyed because not many people do that. And I think they were the first to do it because that film came out in the mid 80s. And so that's also why I feel like there's some kind of nod to Return of the Living Dead because there's some similarities. There has to have been a crossover somewhere in crew. Because in this movie, you also have the issue of how do you kill them? You can't shoot them in the head. You can't even cut off their head because we see zombies take head injuries. Their heads completely come off. None of that is stopping them. No. Everything is trying to kill you. And when we were talking about Return of the Living Dead, they came up with the idea to cremate the bodies.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the only way. You have to burn them down to ash and so they don't come back after you. But then, the fumes go up in the air, it rains, all the chemicals come down into the ground, and we have like this ongoing problem. And we're like, well, how else would you do it? Dead Alive figured out another way to do it. Man, you just grind them into mush.
Just grind them into mush. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and it's, the burning them into ash had its own set of problems, but I think this is a foolproof way.
It seems like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems like you just gotta
gotta carry a lawnmower with you.
And you are discovering how the zombies need to be taken out in this movie along with the characters. There's not a moment where a group of characters are sitting around like, how are we gonna deal with this? It's just happening as it goes, and you're discovering with Lionel, and it's fun to see what methods they come up with to try to get rid of them. But so, as we lead on to after this scene, you think it's all said and done. And I'm like, my mindset's always thinking in video game terms, especially when it has references to video games and vice versa. But I was thinking the big boss at the end. Yes.
That's
the big boss of this movie is Lionel's mother.
Okay. So when she comes out from the basement or the cellar, my brain wants to be logical. And I just start asking myself, how? Why?
How and why did this happen?
But then I have to tell myself, you're watching a zombie movie. You've already given up all kinds of logic and reason. So this is just that universe. So we're just going to accept it because let's face it, we don't know what a world with zombies looks like.
No.
We just go based off what other pop culture references we get from other movies, comic books, whatever, and we just decide that we're going to operate within those rules. When in reality, no such thing exists. We don't know anything about it, and even if it was happening in real time, if it did happen, there wouldn't be anyone to tell us why. There wouldn't be any explanation. It would just be.
Yeah.
And that's how this film is delivering it to us. The same way it just is. Just go with it.
Yeah. Just
it's
go along
worth
for the
it.
ride. So one of the characters in Resident Evil BioShock is a video game that I really recently played that's really good. And there's and I'm wondering if there's even a reference to that too. But the big boss idea of the mom coming out of the basement as a huge creature. I would even go as far as to say like a demon-like creature. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you could say that. But she's definitely like a mutated large zombie. How she was able to get to that state, I don't know. Maybe she had something special in her DNA. Maybe because
maybe it's the level of her evilness.
Oh, yeah. Maybe that manifests into how you look as a zombie.
And she was the first zombie in this particular,
right.
I mean, she was directly infected by the source.
That's true. And the teeth of that creature from the zoo just really got her good. So yeah, definitely.
Maybe.
She was,
she did kind of look rat monkey-ish.
That's true.
Face.
Oh yeah. And her long nails too.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Maybe.
But yeah, and it's amazing that she still maintains some of her character. She was kind of a rotten person before she got infected.
Yeah.
So she still maintained that. And also, I thought that was kind of strange, but just made it even more enjoyable was this idea that Lionel discovers that his mother murdered his father after all these years because he was with a blonde woman.
Yeah.
So all that becomes like a revelation scene. How perfect is it for the final standoff to be on top of the roof of the house, too?
Yeah, right.
And so Paquita, Lionel, our two main characters, are facing off the mom. You got to see the scene for yourself and to see how ridiculous she looks. They really like to emphasize the features of her body and larger forms.
I
guess for some reason, just to make it even more ridiculous.
And at the same time, they really play on it, this whole mommy issue.
Yeah, that's still, which there was the one-liners that she's throwing out there that ties into that.
Well, and what happens to him.
Oh, right. Oh, true. Yes. Oh, my gosh. What happens to him? Should we talk about that or leave
How do
it
we
up
not?
Yeah,
How do
we
not
have to. We have to. So he gets, I can't even I'm just thinking about the visual in my mind. It's like making it so ridiculous.
Her womb opens, her belly just, and it's like, it was like always designed that way.
Yeah.
It's like her mutated body created this creature whose belly just opened. And just absorbs him.
He goes inside her womb again.
And brings him in.
Yes.
Like, what?
It's
what?
The weirdest thing. Like, why is that even... why? I feel
again,
like...
see? But why? How? And you just have to let it go.
You just let it go. And you're just going along. But, all ends well. And that's pretty much like end scene,
End scene, yeah.
You really don't get any more context. You don't know what happens to the characters afterwards. It just ends there. And I think it's a good point to end. I don't think they had to go any more deeper into the relationship between Lionel and Paquita. It's just, you just have to kind of sit there and absorb, what the hell did I just watch?
Yep. That's exactly how I felt.
And there's not too many horror films that do that for me, where you just kind of sit there for a second like, I don't know what to feel. And that was my first time watching it. And then this was being my second time. I was like, I still didn't know what to feel, but I really appreciated it even more in the second time.
Yeah, I do appreciate it for its humor, its gore. It's just unapologetic in the sense of, horror is something that you can also have fun with, especially when it comes to film. Mm-hmm. And, these guys and gals just let it all hang out, man. And kudos to the actress who plays Lionel's mom, because can you imagine sitting down with that script and doing a table read?
No.
And she's probably an actress who has, quite the resume given her. I mean, I'm not sure, but given just her age at the time. Yeah. And she just said, yeah, I like this script. I'm on board.
That's an interesting point, because I like the fact where you see older folk and actors and actresses in horror movies, because they just want to, it's like they want to do something and they understand it. I guess it's one of those things where I feel like it's more of a youth understand it thing, or at least when it comes out at the time in the era in the 90s, like for someone like you said of that age and an actress and a talent to be like, yeah, I'm gonna be a part of this. It's just cool to see like older people involved in that process. It's like the project to blow off steam. Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like, hey, let's have fun with this. So, and she does a great job acting, I feel like, too. She's probably the strongest, I would say. I'd go as far to say that. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
So, I can go on and on about this movie, all the scenes, the tidbits, the gore, talk about all the crazy moments, and I'd have to rewatch it again to see if I even missed something crazy in terms of like the zombie outbreak scenes. But
and we didn't even talk about one of the surprising elements of this whole film, that it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like it. Mm-hmm. But it's probably a good surprise for people who haven't watched it, and for people who have watched it, if you want to talk about it, if you hate the fact that we didn't talk about it, comment on the video, send us an email.
Exactly.
Because you can. We have an email. It's guttedreviews@gmail.com. You can send us your questions, comments, get in on the conversation. Definitely. You can send us movies to watch. We've gotten requests coming down the pipeline. Yeah. We saw your
comment on the video. Yes, thank you, user.
We'll get there. Yes. But yeah, I mean, it's not just movie recommendations. Just be a part of this with us. Definitely. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, please. We want to start interacting with the people that are watching
or listening,
and really get you engaged and recommend stuff to us. We really want to know, because we're just going off of stuff that we love, the deep catalog that we've discussed, off the show too, of what we're wanting to explore. And there's a lot of movies we want to talk about, but we'd love to hear something new, or maybe something we've heard of and just haven't thought of talking about. So again, please reach out to us.
So that concludes our episode today. This time around, Dead Alive, 1992, Peter Jackson. We'll see you next time.